Her birthday cake sat untouched at the center of the table, its single candle already burned down to wax. Victoria Langston hadn't moved in 20 minutes. She sat the way power teaches you to sit, shoulders back. Expression, unreadable eyes, fixed on nothing, while Aurelius breathed warmth around her, like a world designed for everyone else. Candlelight rippled across crystal glasses. Silverware sang against porcelain. At every table surrounding her, someone was reaching for someone else's hand. Her phone lay dark against the white linen, its last message still glowing behind her eyes. Something came up. She had built an empire from nothing. And tonight, she had exactly that. Then the front doors blew open, cold October air, a man in a wrinkled shirt, two little girls in handmade princess dresses, and something irreversible quietly began. She had reserved this table 3 months ago. That detail kept surfacing, the way small humiliations do not loudly, but persistently, like a splinter working its way to the surface. 3 months ago, Victoria Langston had called Aurelius on a Tuesday morning between back-to-back board meetings, given her name to the maître d', and listened to the man's voice shift into a register usually reserved for senators and film stars. Of course, Miss Langston. The corner table. White roses, as you prefer. She had hung up and returned to her meeting without ceremony. That was the thing about her life. The extraordinary had become so routine, it had stopped feeling like anything at all. Daniel had been the one to suggest it. 38 deserves something real. He'd set his hand at the small of her back at some gallery opening neither of them had wanted to attend. She had smiled in the way she smiled at shareholders, measured appreciative non-committal. But she had made the reservation. That was as close to hope as she allowed herself anymore. His text arrived at 4:17 that afternoon. Something came up. No period. No name. Nothing. After 14 months, after weekends in the Hamptons, and introductions at dinners, where introductions carried weight after the quiet conversation about whether two people with schedules like theirs could build something that actually lasted. Something came up. She had read it standing in the elevator of her midtown office tower, 41 floors above the street, and felt nothing. Or rather, she felt something. She had no good name for a specific, hollow variety of unsurprise, as though some older, wiser part of her had been waiting for exactly this. She had gone to dinner anyway. The maître d' had not blinked at the empty chair. The white roses were already arranged. The champagne she hadn't ordered arrived chilled and open. Aurelius understood in the particular way that very expensive places understand things, that the correct response to a powerful woman dining alone on her birthday was to treat it as entirely ordinary. She had appreciated that more than she could say. Now the wax from the birthday candle had cooled to a small, hardened ring at the center of her untouched cake, and Victoria sat watching it, the way she watched spreadsheets looking for information, finding only what was already there. She had grown up in Dayton, Ohio, in a house where the heat was rationed in January, and dinner was whatever her mother could stretch to cover 4 children. She had left at 17 on a partial scholarship, worked double shifts through college, and built Langston & Company from a single-room studio and a maxed-out credit card into the most recognized name in American fashion. Forbes had photographed her for their cover 3 times. She owned a penthouse 12 blocks north of this restaurant and a property in the Hamptons she visited perhaps 6 weekends a year. She had by any measurable standard done the thing she had set out to do, and yet. She looked at the empty chair across from her, the folded linen napkin, the second champagne flute still perfectly clean, catching candlelight for no one. The thought she refused to finish rose anyway. When did winning stop feeling like anything? The front doors opened before she could answer it. The cold came first, a clean sweep of October air that moved through the warm room like a rumor. Then came the sound, small shoes on marble, a high, bright voice saying, "Daddy, I can see sparkles on the ceiling, and another voice nearly identical replying, "Those aren't sparkles. Mia, those are crystals." Miss Patterson said so. Victoria turned as most of the room turned toward the disruption. The man was perhaps 40, though the kind of 40 that suggests a few years of difficulty rather than ease. His shirt was a pale blue Oxford collar, slightly open the fabric, soft with too many washes. He had the hands of someone who worked outdoors, broad across the knuckle, a small scar along the left thumb. He was gripping two small pairs of hands, with the focused care of someone who understood that letting go was not an option. The girls were 5 or close to it. They wore matching dresses, pale pink, floor-length, constructed from what appeared to be satin fabric and determination. The seams were slightly uneven. The hemline dipped on one side. There was tulle at the collar that someone had attached, with evident effort and not quite enough patience, and each girl wore a paper crown, the gold paint still bright. They were without question the best-dressed people in the room. Victoria recognized craft when she saw it. Somebody had spent a great many hours making those dresses, and it had not been the girls. The man she would learn his name was Ryan. Ryan Calloway approached the host stand with the careful composure of someone who had prepared for this moment. He gave his name. He had a reservation. He explained pleasantly and with some precision that he had booked the corner table 6 weeks in advance, that tonight was his daughter's birthday, and that they had been looking forward to this dinner since, and here his voice caught the smallest fraction, like a record skipping one groove since they had seen a photograph of Aurelius in a magazine in a hospital waiting room and had decided it was the most beautiful place they had ever seen. The hostess listened. Her name tag read, Cassandra. She was very young and very practiced in the particular blankness that high-end establishments mistake for professionalism. "I'm so sorry," Cassandra said, in a tone that wasn't sorry at all. "We do have a dress code for evening service. Our policy requires formal attire." Her gaze moved briefly and deliberately to the girls' dresses. "I'm afraid the children's clothing doesn't meet our standard this evening." Ryan's jaw tightened. "They're wearing formal dresses. We require—" "They made those dresses," Ryan said quietly. "They've been working on them for 2 weeks." Cassandra's expression did not change. "I understand, but our policy—" That was when Mia, the one on the left, Victoria would later be able to tell them apart because Mia always reached with her right hand. First looked down at her pink dress. She touched the tulle at her collar. Her bottom lip moved. And then she turned her face up toward her father and said in the small, bewildered voice of a child encountering adult cruelty for the first time, "Is it because my dress is ugly, Daddy?" The room didn't go quiet. The room continued exactly as it had been. Silverware, laughter, crystal, warmth. But something in the quality of the air near the host stand shifted. Victoria felt it the way you feel a change in barometric pressure in the body before the mind. She set her napkin on the table. She had not planned to stand up. The decision arrived fully formed the way her best business decisions always did, not deliberated, but recognized the way you recognize something you already knew. She had spent 20 years learning to want the right things, to ask for the right things, to enter rooms with the specific gravity of someone who understood what her presence was worth. Tonight, she had sat with her cooled birthday candle and her undrunk champagne and her unanswered questions, and she had done nothing. She was very tired of doing nothing. Victoria rose from her chair, crossed the 12 feet of marble flooring between her table and the host stand, and came to rest beside Ryan Calloway and his daughters, with the unhurried certainty of a woman who had never once been turned away from a room she wanted to enter. Cassandra. Her voice carried the particular quiet authority of someone who never needed to raise it. "Would you please get Marcus for me?" Marcus Hale was the general manager of Aurelius and had known Victoria Langston for 11 years. Cassandra seemed to register this information in the slight widening of her eyes. "Of course," Cassandra said. "Right away." Victoria turned to Ryan. He was looking at her the way people looked at her when they had just realized who she was, wary, recalibrating, not yet certain whether this was help or a new variety of problem. "Mr. Calloway," she said, and he startled slightly at his own name. He hadn't given it to her. She had simply heard it at the front desk. "My name is Victoria Langston. I was going to spend this evening eating dinner alone, which is something I've become quite good at, and also deeply uninterested in." She glanced down at Mia and Zoe, who were watching her with the absolute, unguarded attention that only children and animals could sustain. "Your daughters are the best-dressed guests in this restaurant tonight. I'd like you to join me at my table as my guests if you're willing." Ryan opened his mouth, closed it. A muscle moved in his jaw. "We don't need," he started. Zoe, who had been studying Victoria with her head tilted at a considering angle, suddenly reached out and wrapped 3 fingers around Victoria's wrist. "Your bracelet has stars on it," she announced. "Are you a princess too?" Victoria looked down at the diamond cuff she had worn to this dinner, without thinking the one a magazine had once valued at the price of a mid-size car. Then she looked at Zoe's paper crown, still perfectly straight, gold paint catching the chandelier light. "Not yet," Victoria said, and something in her chest, sealed for longer than she could account for, moved. Ryan Calloway was not the kind of man who accepted things easily. Victoria understood this within the first 30 seconds of his silence. He stood at the host stand, with his daughter's hand still in his, looking at her with an expression she had seen before, not on men who disliked her, but on men who were trying to decide whether they did. There was pride in it. The specific load-bearing kind that certain people carry, not out of arrogance, but out of necessity, because it is the last structural wall still standing. "Ms. Langston," he said carefully, "I appreciate what you're trying to do. Then let me do it. We don't take charity from strangers." "I'm not offering charity," Victoria said. "I'm offering a table. I have one. It seats 2, and I find I have considerably more room than I need tonight." She kept her voice even the way she kept it even in negotiations, not cold, but without the temperature that invited argument. "Marcus is going to seat you regardless. I'm simply suggesting we be practical about the geography." Ryan looked at his daughters. Then he looked back at Victoria with the expression of a man who had just realized the conversation had turned a corner without his permission. It was Mia who resolved it. She had been studying the diamond cuff on Victoria's wrist, since Zoe had pointed it out with the focused intensity of someone conducting research. Now she looked straight up at Ryan and said with complete authority, "Daddy, she has a star bracelet. We should sit with her." Zoe nodded once, the paper crown tilting with the motion. "It's only polite," she added in the grave tone of a child quoting something she'd been told repeatedly. Ryan's mouth twitched. It was not quite a smile, but it was something adjacent to one, and it cracked the wall just enough. "All right," he said. Not to Victoria, but to no one in particular, in the voice of a man who knew when a room had voted without him. The corner table at Aurelius was designed for intimacy, which meant it was designed for exactly 2 people, and the arrival of 2 5-year-olds required a rapid and cheerful renegotiation of its architecture. A waiter brought 2 additional chairs without being asked. The white roses were redistributed. The untouched champagne was quietly removed and replaced with a children's menu that Mia immediately began examining with the seriousness of a contract review. Ryan sat across from Victoria and did not know what to do with his hands. She recognized the discomfort she had caused it in boardrooms for 2 decades, in people who arrived expecting one thing and found another. She had learned over time that the most efficient way through it was simply to let it exist without rushing it. "Civil engineering," she said without preamble. She had heard him tell Marcus during the brief exchange at the host stand. "Infrastructure." He glanced up. Bridge design mostly, structural load analysis. He said it the way people said their profession to strangers accurately, but without investment, waiting to see if the other person would lose interest and move on. I spent 2 years fighting the city over a load-bearing wall in my midtown building, Victoria said. The engineer they sent was 26 years old and deeply confident. I found it instructive. Something loosened in Ryan's expression. Confident in what direction? The wrong one, as it turned out. He almost smiled again. This time, it reached slightly further. The evening began to breathe. Mia and Zoe ordered macaroni and cheese, which Aurelius did not have on the menu, and produced anyway, within 20 minutes, perfectly formed, and arriving under a silver dome that made both girls go still with reverence before dissolving into delight. Victoria ordered almost nothing and found herself eating more than she had in weeks from the bread basket, from the appetizers, from a lamb dish that appeared without her quite deciding to want it. There was something about a table with children at it. It made the act of eating feel uncomplicated again. Ryan told her about Amanda, the way people tell you about the dead when they have practiced it enough to do so without breaking with precision, with some warmth, with the careful management of someone who has learned which words are safe and which ones still have edges. His wife had been a kindergarten teacher. She had loved terrible puns and very good coffee and long drives with no destination. The cancer had been swift, and then not swift at all, and by the end, swift again. 18 months ago, the girls had been 3. I kept everything as normal as I could, he said. He was looking at Mia and Zoe, who were engaged in a whispered negotiation over the last breadstick. Routine schedule, the same teachers, the same park on Saturday mornings. I read somewhere that stability was the thing. So I made stability the thing. Victoria watched his face. And tonight is the first birthday I'm not just surviving, Ryan said. I wanted them to remember it as something good. He turned back to Victoria, and something in his expression shifted, less managed, now more direct. A hospital waiting room isn't where you'd expect to find a lifestyle magazine. But there it was, Aurelius full page. Zoe pointed to the photo and said, "That's where princesses eat." He exhaled. So. Victoria looked at the girls in their handmade dresses, their paper crowns, their absolute confidence in the magic of this room. "You made the dresses," she said. "Amanda's mother taught me the basics." Ryan's voice was even. "I'm better at structural steel, honestly. But you work with what the situation requires." Victoria thought of the uneven hemline the tool attached, with loving imprecision, the hours that kind of effort consumed. She thought of what it meant to do something badly and tenderly and completely for someone else. She set down her fork. "It's my birthday tonight too," she said. She had not planned to say it. The words arrived the same way the decision to stand up at the host stand had arrived, not deliberated, simply recognized. Ryan looked at her. She did not elaborate, but he was the kind of man who did not need elaboration. He glanced at the white roses at the birthday cake that still sat at the edge of the table, its candle long gone. "The person you were waiting for," he said. Not a question. "A text at 4:17 this afternoon." She kept her voice level. "No particular explanation." Ryan didn't say he was sorry. She appreciated that. He simply looked at her with the recognition of someone who understood at a cellular level what it meant to sit across from an empty chair. It was Zoe who broke the quiet. She had apparently been listening. Children always are. And she surfaced from her macaroni with sudden electric excitement. "Wait," she said. "It's your birthday? And our birthday?" Victoria nodded. Zoe grabbed Mia's arm. "Maya, it's everybody's birthday." Mia put down the breadstick. This was significant information, and she treated it accordingly. "We need more cake," she said, with the tone of someone identifying a logistical requirement. "Daddy, We need more cake. There's only one cake, and there are 3 birthdays now. Ryan looked at Victoria across the table, and this time the smile broke through completely. It rearranged his face. It made him look like someone she wanted to keep looking at. The waiter brought a second cake. The kitchen had produced it in 15 minutes. Smaller than the first, a single candle, the word Victoria, written in chocolate script across the top. Mia immediately pointed out that the letter V was slightly crooked, which she considered a flaw worth noting. He told her about Seattle later after the plates had been cleared, and the girls were coloring on the paper menus with crayons the waiter had produced, and the restaurant had emptied to its quieter later evening self. It came out the way complicated things come out over good food, and real conversation gradually, without a clean beginning. He had been selected for a structural design project in Seattle, the kind of project that didn't come twice. A major suspension bridge, the sort of work that defined careers. The offer required him to relocate in 3 weeks. That sounds like everything you've worked toward, Victoria said. It is, Ryan said. He turned his water glass slowly in his hands. Mia had a cardiac procedure in January. Minor in the category of cardiac procedures, an atrial septal defect repair. She's been cleared, she's doing well, but her cardiologist wants to maintain monitoring for at least another 12 months. Her doctor is at NYU Langone, one of the best in the country. Victoria looked at Mia, who was drawing what appeared to be a horse with 6 legs and enormous confidence. So you're choosing between the project and her continuity of care, Victoria said. I'm choosing between my daughter's doctor and everything I've spent 12 years building. His voice held no self-pity, just the flat arithmetic of an impossible equation. I haven't figured out how to make those numbers work. Victoria said nothing. She was thinking, but she did not let him see the shape of it yet. She had learned long ago that the worst thing you could do for someone carrying a real problem was to solve it before they had finished carrying it. The evening had grown late. Zoe had abandoned the coloring menu in favor of climbing first onto her chair, then, with the inevitability of water, finding its level onto Victoria's lap. She was small and warm, and smelled of crayon and the particular sweetness of a child after a long, exciting evening. Victoria held herself very still, unsure of the correct way to accommodate this unsure, whether there was one. Zoe leaned back against Victoria's collarbone and looked up at her with the unself-conscious scrutiny that children weaponize without knowing it. "Why do your eyes look sad?" she asked. "You're at a birthday party?" Victoria opened her mouth. Nothing came. "We could sing to you," Zoe said as though this were obvious. "If you want. We know all the words." "Zoe," Ryan started, but Mia had already put down her crayon. She looked at her sister. Something passed between them, the wordless frequency of twins, the private channel that no one else could access. They turned together toward Victoria, took one breath, and began. "Happy birthday to you." Their voices were small and unsteady and absolutely sincere. They sang the way children sing when they mean it entirely, without performance, without self-consciousness, just the pure forward motion of wanting to give someone something. Aurelius, in its late evening quiet, offered no competition. The song moved through the room like light through water. Victoria Langston had not cried in front of another person in 15 years. She knew the exact year. She knew the circumstances. She had built the wall herself, brick by deliberate brick, after a particular night in her first apartment in New York, when she had understood that the version of her that wept and needed and reached for people would not survive what she was attempting. So she had thanked that version of herself and put her somewhere safe and sealed the door. Now, without warning or permission, the door came open. It wasn't the song. Or it wasn't only the song. It was the table, the ordinary, irreplaceable fullness of it. 2 children with paper crowns, a man who drove to a fancy restaurant in an unwashed shirt because he had promised his daughter something beautiful and intended to deliver it. The handmade dresses, The second cake with the crooked V. All of it arriving on the one night she had nothing left to hide behind. She felt the tear before she could stop it. Then another. She pressed 2 fingers briefly to the space below her eye, a gesture so small it might have been anything. It wasn't anything. Ryan watched her. He did not look away, and he did not fill the moment with sound. He simply let her have it. The collapse, the exhale, the long overdue surrender of a woman who had been holding something for too many years to measure. Zoe, still in her lap, reached up and patted her cheek with one small hand, matter-of-factly, as though hearts broke at dinner tables all the time, and the correct response was simply to be present for it. Better, Zoe said, with the certainty of a 5-year-old who had assessed the situation and found her intervention satisfactory. Victoria laughed. It was wet and short and completely unguarded. It was the most honest sound she had made in years. She thought about them for 3 days before she admitted it to herself. Not constantly. She was not a woman given to constancy in matters she couldn't control. But they surfaced the way certain things do in the elevator between floors, in the 4 seconds of quiet, before a conference call connected in the back of a car, moving through Midtown at night, when the city blurred past the window, and she had no particular reason to look at any of it. Ryan's hands turning the water glass, Mia pointing out the crooked V on the cake, with the seriousness of a peer reviewer, Zoe's palm against her cheek, matter-of-fact, and warm as though heartbreak were simply a condition to be acknowledged and moved through. She had gone home that night and stood in her penthouse kitchen, the one she had renovated twice, and cooked in perhaps 11 times, and looked out at the Manhattan skyline for a long time, without thinking anything she could name. On the 4th day, she called her assistant and asked her to pull the records on the Langston Foundation's charitable giving for the current fiscal year. The foundation had existed for 9 years. Victoria had established it at the recommendation of her board tax structure brand, alignment the expected architecture of corporate philanthropy. She approved the annual budget, attended the gala in November, and signed the letters. She had not in 9 years attended a single event at any of the institutions the foundation supported. NYU Langone's pediatric cardiac unit was on the list, had been for 6 years. $40,000 annually disbursed in the spring. The program coordinator's name was Dr. Ellen Marsh, and she had written Victoria a personal thank you letter every year for 6 years, and Victoria had responded to none of them. She read all 6 letters that afternoon in her office, with her door closed. They were written in the plain language of someone who spent her days explaining difficult things to frightened parents. They described specific outcomes, children who had returned to school, to soccer practice, to ordinary life. One letter mentioned a family who had driven from western Pennsylvania because NYU Langone had the only specialist their daughter's condition required. Another described a waiting room redesign, funded in part by the foundation's contribution, that had been specifically intended to give families somewhere gentle to sit during the long hours of surgical procedures. Victoria thought of a lifestyle magazine, open to a full-page photograph of Aurelius, left in a waiting room by accident, or design, or the small, indifferent mercy of coincidence. She picked up the phone and called Dr. Marsh directly. Daniel called on a Thursday 10 days after her birthday. She was in the car returning from a fitting in the garment district, and his name appeared on the screen with the particular mild irony of things that arrive precisely when you have stopped expecting them. She looked at it for 2 rings. Then she answered. He was sorry. He was deeply, genuinely sorry, and he wanted her to know that what had happened, he didn't quite say what had happened, which she noted had nothing to do with her. He had been afraid. He had made a cowardly decision, and he had known it was cowardly when he made it. And if she would give him the chance to— "Daniel," she said. He stopped. "It's all right," she said. And she meant it, which surprised her. "I'm not angry, Victoria. I mean it. I'm genuinely not angry." She watched a yellow cab cut across 2 lanes of traffic without incident. But I don't want to have dinner with you. I don't want to try again. I think we were both waiting for the other person to be someone slightly different, and that's not something more time fixes." The silence on his end was the silence of a man who had prepared for several responses, and not this one. "I hope you find what you're looking for," she said, and she meant that too. She ended the call and sat with the quiet of the car for the remainder of the drive. She had expected to feel something more dramatic, relief or grief, or the specific vertigo of a door closing. What she felt instead was something quieter, like a room finally tidied, like the clean surface of a desk after a long project has been finished and put away. She had not chosen the safe thing. She had not even been tempted by it. That was new. She called Ryan on a Saturday morning. She had his number because she had asked for it at the end of the evening at Aurelius, with the directness she applied to all things. And he had given it with the wariness he applied to most things. And neither of them had said what the number was for. She had not used it in the 10 days since, which was its own kind of statement, though she hadn't been ready to read it. He answered on the third ring. There was noise behind him, the particular domestic texture of a weekend morning cartoons or something adjacent, a small voice in the background asking about orange juice. "Ms. Langston," he said, and she could hear him moving away from the noise, finding a quieter corner. "Victoria," she said. "It's been 10 days. I think we can probably manage first names." A beat. "Victoria. I spoke with Dr. Ellen Marsh at NYU Langone on Tuesday," she said. "She connected me with Dr. James Whitfield, who runs the pediatric cardiac program at Seattle Children's Hospital. He trained under Mia's current cardiologist, Dr. Peterson. They have a formal case transfer protocol, and Dr. Whitfield has reviewed Mia's file. He said he'd be glad to take her on and maintain the same monitoring schedule." She kept her voice even not businesslike, but steady, the way she had learned to be steady when something mattered, and she didn't want the mattering to become a distraction from the information. "You would need to initiate the referral. I can send you Dr. Whitfield's direct contact if you'd like." Silence. "Ryan," she said, "I'm not solving your problem. You would have found this eventually. I just found it faster because I happen to know the people who know the people. That's all this is." "That's not all this is," he said. His voice was quiet. "No," she agreed. "It's not." Another silence different in quality from the first, the kind that holds something rather than avoiding it. "Why?" he asked. Not suspiciously, he was past suspicion. Now she could hear it. Just genuinely. Victoria considered the question with the same honesty she had been trying haltingly to practice since the night Zoe had patted her cheek and told her she looked better. "Because I sat in that restaurant for 20 minutes before you arrived, asking myself what I had built my life for," she said. "And I didn't have a good answer. And then I watched you walk through that door in an unwashed shirt, holding your daughter's hands, like it was the most important thing you'd ever done. And I thought..." She stopped. She reorganized. "I thought that was a better answer than anything I'd come up with on my own." Ryan didn't say anything for a moment. She heard him exhale. "Send me Dr. Whitfield's contact," he said. "I will. And Victoria." There was something in his voice now that hadn't been there at the host stand, or even across the dinner table, something unguarded, the same quality she had heard in him only when he spoke about Amanda, or watched his daughters, the register he used when he was not managing anything. "Thank you. For all of it. Take the project," she said. "You've built something worth taking it for." She began going to the foundation events in November. Not the gala, she had always attended the gala. The other ones. The quarterly visits to the pediatric unit at NYU Langone. The small gatherings where Dr. Marsh introduced her to the staff and the families and the children, who were largely indifferent to her professional reputation and primarily interested in whether she had brought snacks. She had not brought snacks the first time. She brought them every time after. It was not a transformation. She was still Victoria Langston. She still ran a billion-dollar company with the precision of someone who had built it from a single room. She still sat in the back of cars moving through Midtown at night and looked at the city the way she always had, with a mixture of ownership and remove that was possibly the defining condition of her adult life. But something had shifted in the architecture, the way a building shifts when a load is redistributed. Nothing collapsed. Everything stood. It simply stood differently. She and Ryan talked on the phone. Not every day. They were both people with full lives and real responsibilities, and neither of them was inclined toward the performance of closeness. But regularly. He told her about the bridge project in increments, describing structural challenges with the evident pleasure of someone who loved their work and rarely had occasion to explain it to someone willing to follow the logic. She found to her genuine surprise that she was willing. She told him about the foundation visits, about a girl named Lily, who had explained to Victoria at length, and with diagrams drawn in crayon, the correct way to build a blanket fort. Ryan had laughed. She had been trying to make him laugh, she realized, and the realization had sat pleasantly in her chest for the remainder of that day. Mia's transfer to Dr. Whitfield went smoothly. Her first appointment in Seattle, Ryan texted her, had concluded with Mia informing Dr. Whitfield that his office needed better art on the walls. Dr. Whitfield had agreed and asked for her recommendations. Victoria had read this text 3 times. She flew to Seattle on a Friday in October. 1 year, almost to the week from the night, the front doors of Aurelius had opened, and everything irreversible had quietly begun. She had not made a ceremony of the timing, or she had tried not to, but she had been aware of it in the way you are aware of things you've decided not to make ceremonies of. The airport at Seattle was gray and clean and smelled of rain, and Ryan was standing at the arrivals exit in a different shirt. This time properly ironed, she noted, dark blue with the same hands she had memorized across a dinner table and the same quality of attention in his face that she had recognized on the first night as something rare. She had rehearsed in the car from the hotel various ways to open this. She had options. She was a woman who generally arrived with options. She did not use any of them. She simply walked to him, and he looked at her in the way he had been looking at her. Across 12 months of phone calls and texts, and 1 photograph Mia had drawn and mailed to her New York office, a picture of 4 people at a table, labeled in uncertain handwriting, Daddy, Mia, Zoe, Victoria, and neither of them said anything that needed saying yet because some things are better arrived at slowly. "They're at home," Ryan said. "There's a cake situation. I've been informed that the decorating is classified, and I'm not allowed back in the kitchen until further notice." Classified by whom? Jointly. They presented a unified front. He picked up her bag before she could, and she let him. "Mia wants to know if you like sprinkles." "I have no position on sprinkles. I'd form one before we get there. She'll ask." They walked out into the gray October afternoon. Seattle spread around them, unfamiliar and immediate smelling of rain and salt and possibility. Victoria had been to this city exactly twice on business, moving between airports and conference rooms and hotels, and had retained no impression of it that mattered. She had a feeling she was about to. The kitchen was small and yellow-lit, and it smelled of sugar and something slightly burnt. And when Victoria stepped through the front door, both girls launched themselves from the kitchen doorway with the velocity of people who had been containing themselves for hours. Mia wrapped both arms around Victoria's waist. Zoe, taller by perhaps 1/4 of an inch than Victoria remembered, grabbed her hand with the same 3-fingered grip she had used in Aurelius a year ago, as though the intervening year were simply a gap in a conversation she intended to continue. "We made 3 layers," Zoe announced, "because there are 3 birthdays." "We tried 4, Mia said with the gravity of a project manager reporting lessons learned, but the 4th one fell. "It fell a lot," Zoe confirmed. "It was a learning experience," Mia said. Ryan caught Victoria's eye over their heads. She looked away before he could see her face fully, because what was on her face was too unguarded for her to have decided yet whether to give it to him, and she was still after all of this learning how. The cake sat in the center of the kitchen table, 3 layers listing slightly to the left, covered in frosting, applied with enthusiasm rather than technique, buried under an avalanche of multicolored sprinkles and decorated with candles more than necessary, arranged without apparent pattern, blazing with the combined wattage of a small signal fire. Across the top, in red frosting letters, "Happy birthday to all of us." Zoe pulled her toward the table. The candles burned. Mia stood on her chair because the table was high, and she had things to say. "You have to make a wish," Mia said, with the authority of someone who had considered this responsibility carefully. "A real one, not a fake one." "How do you tell the difference?" Victoria asked. Mia thought about it. "A real wish is one that scares you a little bit." Victoria looked at the candles. She looked at the 2 girls in their best clothes, different from the princess dresses, but made with the same evidence of effort and care. She looked at Ryan standing just behind them, watching her with that unguarded attention of his that she had been trying to deserve for a year. She thought about the table set for 2 with an empty chair, the text at 4:17. The candle burned down to wax before she could blow it out. She thought about Zoe's hand on her cheek. Better. She leaned forward and blew out every candle in one breath. The girls erupted. Ryan began cutting cake before anyone could ask him to. The kitchen filled with the noise of people entirely present in the same moment, and Victoria Langston sat down at the small table in this small kitchen in this unfamiliar city and felt with a specificity that neither money nor ambition had ever managed to produce exactly where she was. She was somewhere she belonged. That was the whole of it. That was all of it. That was enough.